I think it's time to admit that telling people your favorite genre of movies is comedy is cheating. Look, I get it. As a fundamentally unserious guy myself, I have been seriously guilty of this crime against genre specificity for most of my life, probably, but that doesn't give me, or you, an excuse to keep doing it. Now, don't get too upset. I'm not coming out swinging for comedy heads. In fact, I think the same goes for anyone who just says drama is their favorite genre, too. And it isn't that either of those answers are wrong, per se. They're just lazy? Okay, the problem lies in specificity. When you give someone so broad a category, you aren't really telling them anything. So many movies are funny, and defining comedy is so subjective, too. I mean, if you asked Shakespeare, he would have told you that a comedy is a story where the good guys live and the bad guys get punished in the end. And I know that's not what you meant when you said that. Luckily, for us, we have a way to solve all your genre specificity needs. The subgenre. Breaking it down into phylogenetic terms, if a movie were a species, then a subgenre would be its genus. Biology jokes. If you didn't get that, watch Clint's Reptile Room. He's really, really good. Anyways, you might think that it would be enough to have subgenres for the purpose of conveying what the style, tone, and techniques of your favorite movie are, but you'd be wrong. There is a heated debate as to what it means to be a subgenre of film, or even what a genre is. A question I discussed in my video essay, Defining the Dark, about the attempt to categorize and classify film noir. Go check it out. Today, we are going to answer that question by analyzing the subgenre that I see cause the most confusion among online debaters and scholars alike. The subgenre that happens to be my favorite of all. Today, we will define... To answer the question of what a mockumentary is, we first need to understand its history. Now, unfortunately for us, the history of the mockumentary is filled with contention and debate. No one can agree on when the subgenre even started. Every scholar has their own takes on what constitutes the first mockumentary. In his Cine Stay article, The Sincerest Form of Flattery, A Brief History of the Mockumentary, Thomas Doherty claims that there is no definable first mockumentary, saying that you would have to look back to the lost media made by Edison, but claims that
the locus classicus, the first truly authentic exemplar of the fake documentary in American cinema, was conjured by that MediaCon artist par excellence Orson Welles, whose fake radio news bulletins in the Mercury Theatre's production of H.G. Wells's The War of the Worlds traumatized an invasion-wary nation in 1938.
Indeed, Orson Welles' War of the Worlds was often cited as the first example of mockumentary. Ashwanta Jackson from JSTOR Daily and the blurb from NYFA also cite similar opinions. Well, I have a few qualms with this. First of all, I feel like if you asked Orson Welles if he considered his foundational sci-fi radio drama a mockumentary, he would drunkenly bark at you and say something like, "Oh, you dare insult the virginity of my heart," or something like that. More importantly, it mistakes something fundamental to the art form and necessary to the subgenre: the satire. As Dr. Sonika Sati states in her work, Mockumentary, the New Age Satire is Taking the World by Storm, mockumentaries often serve as a mirror reflecting society's idiosyncrasies and absurdities. By exaggerating and distorting reality, these works shed light on underlying social issues in a palatable and entertaining manner. What she's describing here is a textbook example of Horatian satire, one of the three lineages of satire brought about by the ancient Greeks and Romans, the other two being Menippean and Juvenalian satire. While all three use humor to critique societal ailments, Horatian satire is unique in its method of doing so, with tolerance, levity, and wit trying to make the audience smile to inspire change rather than Juvenal's attempt to inspire anger. With this in mind, I think we have to understand that the first evidence of the mockumentary wasn't in 1938, but actually 1800 years prior, in Lucian of Samasota's satirical travelogue, A True History. That's right, nerds. Mockumentaries are nothing new. You've been had. Now, obviously, a satire from almost 2,000 years ago is not really a mockumentary. They didn't have films, or documentary tropes, or cameras and boom holes until over 70 years after Lucian passed away. But still, the tradition of mockumentary as a subgenre far predates its origin in film. At its core, a mockumentary is a work of satire that uses and mimics the format and style of nonfiction media. And as you all know, mockumentary is a portmanteau of the words documentary and mockery. From my research, every single paper written on the subject cannot help but mention that fun little factoid as if it were brand new information. I, however, don't think you are stupid. Yet, still, I find that very few look into the origin of documentary to dig into what that really means. Documentary, as a genre, existed long before film. Documentary can be explained conceptually as a work made to document real events, facts, or history in a digestible format. In pre-photography history, this was done through writing and oration. Historically, the travelogue, a form of writing or oratory that documented, in purported truth, the events of one's travel, was easily the most popular type of nonfiction work available. Think of the published travelogues of Marco Polo, Ibn Jabir, or Ibn Battuta from the medieval period, or Robert Louis Stevenson's 1879 A Travel with a Donkey in Cevennes, or, most importantly, the Greeks' travelogues, like the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea, or Pausanias's description of Greece in the 2nd century CE. These were the earliest examples of documentary, or at the very least, proto-documentary. So, Lucian's A True History, which is delivered exactly as a travelogue is written, in earnest but filled with hilarious fictional events and happenings, must then be the earliest example of mockumentary, or, at the very least, proto-mockumentary. Climbing back to the realm of cinema, I think the strongest example for a true cinematic mockumentary must be the April 1st, 1997 episode of the BBC TV show Panorama, otherwise known as the Spaghetti Tree Hoax. The episode followed the documentary format to a T. A narrator spoke over live-action shots of people performing the actions discussed by the narrator documenting truth, or reportedly. However, the events were fictional. The mock reported that spaghetti was farmed off trees by Swedes, and according to BBC on this day, people believed it. Quote, "But some viewers failed to see the funny side of the broadcast and criticized the BBC for airing the item on what is supposed to be a serious, factual program. Others, however, were so intrigued they wanted to find out where they could purchase their very own spaghetti bush." Reportedly, in 1957, spaghetti was uncommon in the UK and considered a foreign delicacy. Because it uses the documentary elements while still being a comedy, 1957's Spaghetti Tree Hoax is my pick for the first real instance of a mockumentary being filmed and publicly aired. Soon after, the format would really start to blossom. The boom in mockumentaries began around the late 1960s. As one would expect, the popularity of the mockumentary coincides directly with the popularity of the documentary. In the late 1960s and 70s, the standard format for what we consider a documentary developed into a more codified set of practices, elements, and styles. It arose from the development of portable cameras and film equipment and lights, which made it possible to take the camera on the go, thereby reviving the cinema verite movement in the late 50s and 60s. With the boom in TV, documentaries became popular at home and in theater viewing, and there was an exponential increase in their production. This profundity led directly to public familiarity, and familiarity leads to open doors for satirization. Thus, documentaries headed for their prime, their golden age. Movies like 1961's The Connection and Woody Allen's 1969 film Take the Money and Run would, while having moderate success, become staples for taking the genre into the world of full-length cinema. Both films highlight the sophisticated style, tone, and elements of a documentary, and are played as non-fiction productions. However, they lack the tongue-in-cheek, satirical tone that would later come to define the subgenre as its own. We would see the format shift into the shape we recognize as a mockumentary with 1978's Auditions. This erotic black comedy centers on the audition process of various adult film actors and actresses. The tongue-in-cheek tone of the mockumentary really comes through as the film portrays an almost entirely fictional world of adult entertainment as if it were serious, despite the absurdity and borderline whimsy of the action unfolding on camera. While the film captured the tone of a mockumentary, it still struggled to integrate documentary elements into a fully cohesive product. Though the subgenre still hadn't found its footing, all the ingredients of mockumentary had been primed and tested, and now the stage was set, the audience was there, all that was left was for someone to kickstart the engine. And if you want to know where and when mockumentary cemented itself in the cultural zeitgeist, you need to turn it up to 11. This is Spinal Tap, truly defines the genre to this day. Directed by Rob Reiner and released in 1984, the film perfectly encapsulates the subject matter. It offers a dive into the fictional band Spinal Tap and documents their trials and tribulations on tour in America near the supposed end of their career. From the first frame of the film, it nails the mockumentary. While seldom replicated today, the opening, in which director Rob Reiner, portraying the in-fiction director Marty DeBerge, explains the documentary's context and his experience shooting it. He sets the stage for an unforgettable mock. It provides a simultaneous veritability to the mockumentary, while also hinting at the tongue-in-cheek nature that encapsulates the film ahead. In a way, it offers a pickle for the knowing ones, peeling back the layers of the onion to show you that, at its heart, this movie is a fake documentary. And all else is secondary to that principle. The meat of the film also perfectly marks the documentary format. The camera is never used in a non-linear or immersion-breaking way. At every instance, the camera exists diegetically. There is never a crossing of that invisible line separating the camera and the cameraman. He and the crew are always there, and it never for a second stops being a documentary. The comedic elements are also outstanding. The musical scoring of songs like Big Bottom is accompanied by details so minor yet noticeable that it creates a world that feels absolutely real despite being decidedly fake. They switched to basses during that song. Everyone is playing a bass guitar. The bassist has a double-necked bass guitar, but instead of it being like a regular guitar and then a bass guitar, it's just two bass guitars. It isn't brought to attention either. It is something that non-musicians might not even have the knowledge of instruments to understand. I mean, hell, even a musician might overlook that detail, but it exists because the world is real. The satire of rock musicians and rockumentaries is perfectly fit. It does not fall into the realm of parody through direct homage, as in The Ruttles' All You Need Is Cash, another very popular mockumentary that satirizes the Beatles. Many jokes in the movie are based on real events that happened to rock stars on tour in the US. My dad told me that. Is it true? Probably. Regardless, despite the outlandish nature of many of the bits, they all remain grounded in realism. The iconic "This One Goes to 11" scene was so authentic that Marshall amps actually released guitar and bass amps with knobs that went up to 11. Spinal Tap proves that reality, verite, is fundamental to the mockumentary. With its creation, the floodgates sprang forth, and mockumentary thrived from the mid-'80s till the early 2000s. Obvious standouts include Zelig, written and directed by Woody Allen, albeit a year before Spinal Tap. Best in Show, the documentary about a dog show and the people who go to it and their little animals. That one might be my personal favorite. Waiting for Guffman, and 2003's A Mighty Wind, which was written and developed by the exact same team as Spinal Tap, funnily enough. And now that we understand the context of the mockumentary, we can get into the juice of my concerns as we delve into the... Okay, look, I've been putting it off, but I think we need to talk about Borat. Borat! Cultural learning of America for make benefit of glorious nation of Kazakhstan. Jesus, that doesn't even fit on the page. Is a 2006 film directed by Larry Charles, starring Sacha Baron Cohen as probably insensitive portrayal of a Kazakh TV personality and documentarian. Throughout this film, we see Cohen embody the faux persona of the fictional Borat Sagdiyev as he travels across America and engages in hijinks with a variety of colorful American characters. The gimmick of the film is that the mockumentary features real people and unscripted events. At its core, Borat satirizes the ignorance of Americans about foreign culture. And I'm all here for that. But I think Borat signaled the beginning of a shift in mockumentaries from something real and satirical into parody. Specifically, I kind of think it shifted from Horatian satire into Juvenalian satire, then into parody. Borat might be the reason people are calling The Office and Parks and Rec mockumentaries, too. You see, to make something truly fit into the category of a subgenre, it needs to meet all of the requirements. It has to check off all of the boxes on the proverbial list. All of them that make up our subgenre. In our case, that means we have to have two things. First, it has to use all of the genre-specific film elements in its making. For mockumentaries, they have to follow the conventions of documentary filmmaking without exception. For example, a documentary film must be driven by talking heads interviews, archival footage, on-the-spot moments, or narration. There must be a foregone conclusion that the camera crew is a living entity outside of the actors, and their presence must be felt, even if not acknowledged. There should not be a suspension of the diegesis of the filmmaking process, outside of the exemption of reenactment. That still counts. While there are more tropes available to choose from, only these three seem to be inexorable. Second, to qualify for the sub in the subgenre, mockumentaries must follow the tone unique to the subgenre. Tone can be a bit trickier to pin down, but it works if you think of it like the mood combined with the purpose, or how the film presents itself. Earlier, I described mockumentaries as being the same lineage as Horatian satire, and I still think that fits perfectly when describing tone. In mockumentaries, there must be this balance between the satirical realism of the world and the tongue-in-cheek comedy, which serves to make you smile. The tone of a mockumentary is not overly cynical, or meant to inspire anger or fear. The tone of a mockumentary is not overly cynical, or meant to inspire anger or fear. That would constitute its own subgenre, probably a pseudo-doc or a docudrama. Instead, a mockumentary aims to straddle the line between absolute verite and absolute absurdity to poke fun at the eccentricity of real life, and make you think about life with a smile on your face because of it. Suppose we accept that a mockumentary is a film that follows those two golden rules. In that case, it becomes clear why so many mockumentary-style films fail to fall into that category, and why modern examples like Borat have started to shift away from the subgenre into their own category. Borat, while following the tropes of a documentary to a T, doesn't capture the tone of a mockumentary or its spirit. The movie is dated and aged poorly, sure, but more than that. The film relies on shock and anger to cause laughs and humor. The nature of the trickery in many circumstances relies not on a case of laughing with the subject, but of laughing at the subject and inspiring the audience to shock, anger. It's the realm of a shockumentary, or a parody, or a prank show, not a mockumentary. However, Borat did really, really well, and the moniker mockumentary stuck to it and permanently shifted how we see mockumentaries. That is why I think the debate around mockumentaries is so fascinating and contentious. To many film scholars, the definition of a mockumentary is muddled. The primary reason scholars seem divided in their theories is a lack of consideration of tone. I think we can look at an example from Victoria Neapolitano's paper, The Mock Doc Series, The History of the Mockumentary, as a good illustration of what I mean. Quote, "The goal of most mockumentary films is to trick the audience into believing that the people and events depicted are or were real. Indeed, to capture the audience's trust, directors of mockumentaries apply many of the techniques and conventions of documentary films. Mockumentaries leave the audience questioning the truth of what they have experienced. Based on this direct manipulation, a mockumentary can appear to be both real and fake, both shocking and humorous, both projected and actual." Oh boy. Let's deconstruct that a little bit. Neapolitano posits that the goal of mockumentary film lies not in the pursuit of comedy and satire, but in the pursuit of deceit and illusion. From reading her paper, her theory hinges on the use of documentary and verite cinema techniques to intentionally misdirect the audience into believing falsified accounts of a reality. Dr. Sonika Sethi corroborates a similar theory, stating, "These elements contribute the illusion of reality, making it challenging for viewers to discern fact from fiction. They craft an illusion of realism that blurs the line between fiction and reality." Again, we see these authors draw a distinction within the mockumentary format regarding the power of illusion. They see the purpose of the format not as a relatable jumping point for satire, but as a mask that hides the truth about the fiction. And that's the fly in the ointment for me. I think scholar Japelli Flourier really strikes at the heart of this point better than anyone else I've read. In his paper, The Mockumentary History of a Deception, Perception, Image Consciousness, and Narrative Engagement, that's another mouthful, Japelli explores the mockumentary through the lens of phenomenology, the study of how experiences are perceived and altered by our consciousness. He explains that when we watch a documentary film, we slip into a documentary consciousness, where our brain is activating all three different levels of image consciousness. The material, which is sort of the graphic interface, or the screen. The iconic object, which is the images we see that are not flesh and blood, or people or stone objects, but images on the TV. And then the iconic subject, which is the people or the things that those images represent to us. Even though a documentary shows us images of real beings and presupposes our belief that these things existed, nothing in the images themselves can ground our belief on its own. It has to be externally believed. What we see on screen is almost always happening after the fact. It is a story that is put as a part of reality. And it's going to be a story first and foremost before it actually sits in as real to us. Documentary is reconstruction, in the same way that a film based on true events is reconstruction. And both are just different ways of telling a story. Japali claims that mockumentary starts with the opposite set of circumstances. Quote, "These works do not start with the intent to defraud the viewer by passing off the fake as real. Rather, they appropriate documentary aesthetics for playful purposes, providing the viewer with only subtle clues that they are playing with documentary codes. It does not make sense to speak of perceptual deception in the case of mockumentary. In fact, the opposite is true. It is precisely because there is no perceptual deception that the mockumentary works. The kind of representation seeks to avoid deceiving us to the greatest extent, offering scenes and situations as if we were living them firsthand in our real lives." We go into mockumentary knowing that the story is fake. Its job is not to perpetually deceive us into the belief that something is real. Instead, the mockumentary's job is to make us forget about our preconceived notions of fiction for a moment and perceive the artifice of the fictional world as real. The mockumentary allows us to engage in intellectual deception, just as a good puzzle or a good video game does. Mockumentary doesn't blur the lines. It just invites you, the viewer, to play on the other side of them. Mockumentary isn't about convincing the audience of its veracity in the same way as a wax sculpture. In reality, that is more in the lines with the goals of sitcoms and dramas. Sitcoms with mockumentary elements, like The Office or Parks and Rec or Modern Family, are often hailed as mockumentaries, but they fail to meet our criteria for mockumentary under scrutiny. Partially, it's because they fail to use documentary techniques to a satisfying extent. While The Office does a pretty good job of keeping the camera crew diegetic, all of the shows mentioned above routinely separate the camera's diegesis as a means of storytelling. The worst example must be Modern Family by this metric, a show which, through its entire runtime, only uses a single consistent documentary technique, and that's the talking head interview. Secondly, these shows operate in the realm of standard TV sitcoms. They are not built around the concept of intellectual deception, but perpetual deception, like a wax figure or a traditional narrative film. Through our analysis, it seems clear that the contemporary perception of a mockumentary has shifted. And that's due to the prevalence of mockumentary elements, and they maintain their charm and use, while very few contemporary examples of true mockumentary that follow both the technical element and the tonal or philosophical element of this genre exist. So where does that leave us? I think it's clear that mockumentary isn't going anywhere in the future but up. While that might be contrary to what is happening with mockumentary right now, I think the genre offers so much in terms of satire and comedy, especially in a divided age with the new media and fake news being so hard to sift through. It's the time for mockumentaries to thrive again. It's absolutely here. We've already seen the impact of mockumentaries on film and TV, and the power of their intellectual deception is precisely what we need. As with everything, taste comes and goes, and the taste for mockumentary will swing around again. In fact, I think it already has. Spinal Tap 2, The End Continues, was released earlier this year, marking a hilarious return to the form that meets all the criteria for a true mockumentary, stylistically and tonally. While it didn't have excellent reviews from critics, it was absolutely beloved by the fans, myself included, earning an audience score almost equaling the first movie. That's really hard to do. TV shows like It's Florida Man, while not being a mockumentary, offer insight into the demand we have for funny documentaries, and that's a niche that's pretty closely tied to mockumentaries. Maybe, most importantly of all, the rise of Netflix and streaming services has made the documentary itself arguably the largest and most popular it has ever been in history. And, as history tends to repeat itself, I would predict that this market, flooded with documentaries and a massive need for humor, I think it'll be the perfect grounds for new mockumentaries to be made. So don't dismay, mockumentary heads. The show hasn't even started yet. I've been Jack McLaughlin, and thanks for watching.